Hey everybody, this is Perch. This is a video asking, does Chris Claremont hate Apocalypse? Okay, so we'll go into the kind of reasons inside this mail. There's some interesting ones here. Appreciate this writer, has written in before, so always brings good questions to the mix. So the question being, Chris Claremont, of course, has had his hands on a lot of villains. Apocalypse is not one of his main ones. He did a lot with a number of other characters, and we'll kind of go into this. But kind of before we start here, when they did the Krakoa era, one of the things they did is they brought the villains in, and there was that issue where it was meant to be kind of a big deal, a big striking moment where Xavier and Magneto opened, Krakoa up to all mutants, including villains. And a lot of people commented on that moment being absurd. I did as well. Mr. Sinister showing up there is a strange move. Lady Deathstrike. Many of these characters do not make sense in the context of why they would suddenly be invited onto the island. Apocalypse, despite kind of everything that had happened with the X-Men, I think is the only one that could make sense or that potentially does have an interesting kind of connection into everything else. And they did play that out for, the work that Teenie Howard did. And I know that's the bane of a lot of people's existence, but in the original Excalibur and kind of what she did with the title and everything else, the handling of Apocalypse and the transformation of the Apocalypse, while not what I wanted personally, because I liked Apocalypse as a villain, as a true kind of threat to the X-Men and everything else, I liked that status quo of the character. I admit that at least the storyline that they did with the tie-in to Krakoa and Arakko and everything else that Apocalypse is up to and kind of his driving force to kind of reestablish the family and all of those pieces, survival of the fittest, the story did make some level of sense. Again, there's a difference between a story I like and whether it makes sense. I didn't like the outcome of that story because I liked Apocalypse as a villain, but there was work done to actually, try and thread it all together. This is very faint praise. Please, nobody, jump in here going, Perch says all this stuff was great and he loves it. No, that's not what I'm saying at all. But I'm saying in the grand scheme of things, it did, there was some logic to it, is all I'm saying. And I appreciate that in a world where there's very little logic given to characters, that one had some. So I think you could make an argument that Apocalypse showing up in the Krakoa era actually, there was a plan there and there was a method to the madness that did not exist for, various other characters like Omega Red and Sabretooth. But be that as it may. So let's get to this mail. It says, "Hey Perch, I've been wondering this for a while and haven't been able to find any information one way or the other online. I'm hoping you can help considering your vast knowledge and experience with comics, especially from the X titles. Does Chris Claremont hate Apocalypse?" I'll start out that I'm an unapologetic Apocalypse fanboy, and I tend to write off any writer as a crap writer if they write a bad appearance of Apocalypse, but the one I struggle with is Chris Claremont. No one can rightfully say Claremont is a bad writer. His style may not be to their liking, but his record speaks for itself. However, whenever Claremont has written Apocalypse, it has been awful. As soon as Wheezy left X Factor, Claremont jumped on and gutted Apocalypse into a generic power-seeking villain with bad jokes. Years later, when Marvel was on their kick of releasing alternate universe The End books, Claremont literally had Apocalypse show out of nowhere and die off immediately. Hell, the closest thing to a good Apocalypse book Claremont ever wrote was this part of the fucking 12 story, which was bad, by the way. I feel that Claremont is just so overprotective of his X-Men that he tends to dislike and downplay characters that he didn't create or write in his initial run. I can understand to a point, but we're not talking about some derivative extreme character like Onslaught. Apocalypse was created by Claremont's longtime friend and colleague Lee Simonson. You'd think that alone would prevent him from so thoroughly shitting on the character. Hope you can shed some light in this situation. Well, maybe a bit, because this question has come to Claremont before, and I was even trying to remember who asked it. The con I went to in Puyallup, Washington, a couple years ago, Claremont was there, and people were talking to him about Apocalypse. It was he doesn't like Apocalypse. And in terms of it's not one of his favorite villains, and I think it had a lot to do with kind of the mythology around Apocalypse, which was different from the mythology he was creating, and the kind of the different pros and cons of everything he was putting into play. Keep in mind, Claremont had kind of a lot of balls in the air around kind of the other world and some stuff with Roma and kind of a lot of different parts to mythology that were very different from where Apocalypse was coming from, in a very weird ass way. And man, this is twice in one video, so I feel like I'm really out of my mind. Oh, here's an ambulance. It's going for something. Don't know what. It's pissed though. Yeah, I had to do a little cut edit there because there was a ambulance just trying to get through, and a bunch of cars here in Texas are like, nope, you don't get to come through. So it was an interesting little battle that was playing out. I thought for a minute I was going to be actually in this video, I was going to get to narrate an ambulance just plowing through cars, because it looked for a minute like the driver was like out of fucks and was just going to start to move cars out of the way with its with the actual body of the car itself, which would have been pretty nifty. Anyway, where sorry about that. Where was I? So that was actually a sign that I shouldn't say what I'm about to say, which was, I think that Teenie Howard, in the strangest possible way, attempted to kind of combine some of the mythology of what Claremont was doing with kind of Otherworld and Roma and kind of the Star Citadel and kind of all that stuff, and merge it back into the Apocalypse mythology that was going on. In a weird way, she was actually trying to marry up the two concepts. Funny, but anyway, Claremont had his own vision for how a lot of this otherworldly kind of stuff would work, and Claremont also fancied himself, for better or for worse, as a who could kind of merge the science fiction and fantasy elements of comics. It's why you see a lot of kind of references to King Arthur and kind of elements like that. And there became a point where he felt the apocalypse concept of survival of the fittest and kind of this Egyptian kind of stuff that went on was kind of the antithesis to what he did. Now, he did try and kind of reclaim it in a weird way with the 12, but that was also that became a weird subplot that he never fully paid off, and then it clearly didn't go where it was aimed, and it was poor. It was not well thought up, I guess, in the whole scheme of things. So I guess the answer to your question is he didn't like the character, or at least it wasn't one of his favorites. It wasn't a character that he enjoyed writing or felt like he had a good connection to, and I think that showed up in the writing plenty. So the answer is yes, he didn't like the character, and there you have it. As for if he hated the character, I think he'd object if we were to ask him, like, do you hate Apocalypse? Do you intentionally kind of write the comics in order to shit on the character? I think he would say no. I think he does not view that as what he was doing. But I also think that, I don't think he'd necessarily admit it if he did. I mean, I think Claremont, despite the fact that when he goes to cons and he gives speeches and he does things, he is more wacky, and he absolutely enjoys trolling, the hell out of people in a lot of different ways. In these conventions, he does adhere by the golden rule of do not entirely, crap on people that you respect, and he absolutely does respect Louis Simonson and a lot of stuff that went on there. So I think that it's one of those cases where he didn't write the character, he didn't invent it. It kind of, the whole origin and kind of general thrust of what Apocalypse was up to didn't align with where he saw the whole mutant mythology going, and so he didn't really know what to do with the character, and so he never paid the character much attention, and it kind of showed up in the writing. That's my take on it. So there you go. Hopefully an answer and a handful of almost compliments to Teenie Howard in one video. So crazy, right? I don't know. It's a weird ass day for sure. Anyway, there you go. Like and subscribe, of course, and thanks for listening.